You guys can hear me all right? I'm kind of bad at projecting. I also have a sinus gum going on here. So I apologize. You guys in the front row.
Thanks.
But yeah, how's it going?
Good.
You really just let anybody up here, huh? Yeah, I kind of have an introduction worked into my talk anyway, so I just want to jump right into it. You guys probably know a little bit of background about me. I went to a Christian college for my first 2 years of college, Colorado Christian University, and every Wednesday we would have a talk where people would come up, we'd all usher into the gym, and somebody, either a teacher or a renowned speaker from across the country, would come and talk to us among thousands of people, thousands of students. It was actually pretty cool, so we got some really good speakers. And one day we were there, and a guy walks up on stage, and he starts talking about Jesus and celestial invaders and how we're all being controlled, and I'm thinking, this is a weird start to a talk. I don't quite understand his analogy. And after about 5 minutes, somebody rushes on stage, pulls him off. And it turns out that wasn't our speaker, it was just some guy from the street who just walked on stage. That's honestly a true story. But it really motivates me, because really all you have to do to be a speaker is walk on stage. I'm doing it. But just to jump in, give you a little bit more about me, I grew up in Colorado. I worked in, I'm sorry, that's from another talk, I'm sorry. Yeah. So that's me, I'm from Colorado. I moved here about 12 years ago. I'm married to that beautiful woman over there. There she is. We have a cat. His name's Spidey. I like cats, honestly. I'm not a preacher, so I don't have to talk about eating them. I think that's kind of a weird thing. Anyway, I want to talk about work tonight. I'm actually kind of excited about it because I feel like blessed in a lot of ways about my job. And I get to share some of that with you. And I hope I have a unique perspective on it. It's stuff that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. So it's probably heresy. But to do that, I want to jump back. You guys picked the right person. I'll jump back to when I first started working. I mentioned I'm from Colorado. I grew up there. I grew up pretending to be a Ninja Turtle, honestly. I remember a lot of years playing Sonic the Hedgehog and reading Spider-Man comics. It was a pretty cool childhood, I think. But when I was 15, I got my first job. It was at a place called Waterworld. Sorry, not that one. That one. They claim to be the largest outdoor water park in the country, and I don't know if that's true, but that's what they say. It was a cool job. I got to be outside most of the time. I got a really cool tan / sunburn. I was a cashier 1 is what they called me, and that meant that I didn't handle money. I thought it was a weird title, but I stood in front of the park and I just checked your bag when you came in to make sure you weren't carrying glass. So I made $4 an hour, which was big bucks back in those days, at least for a 15-year-old. Meant I could buy a lot of comics and video games and Taco Bell. Shamefully, not a lot has changed in my spending habits. But I have a vivid memory of that first day before I started work here at Waterworld. I remember sitting on my bed and looking at my hat. It was part of my uniform, right? It said Waterworld on the front. It was the day before my first day of work in my entire life. And I remember feeling this heavy weight, and I just remember sort of like feeling this oppression, right? I remember feeling like this sense of, man, what have I gotten myself into? Like, I'm about to go work. Like, I knew this sense. I knew I was entering into a new stage of life. And it kind of stressed me out, honestly. And it stressed me out because I don't think I had a good attitude about work. I feel like I had a bad view of what work was supposed to be. See, I thought work was a result of the fall. I thought work was something we had to do because of the fall, and work was evil. And I don't know if you guys have been there or not, but I thought when we died and went to heaven, we would actually be in paradise and we'd just be praising God and celebrating God, and we wouldn't have to work anymore. That's what I thought, right? Maybe you guys have been there. And I want to look at a couple verses in Genesis real quick. That's way smaller than I expected, but okay. Hopefully you can read that. These are the verses that kind of helped frame my early understanding of what work was about. So I'll just run those through with you guys here real quick. This is Genesis 3:8 is where it starts. Now the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he placed man, the man that he formed. I'm glad you guys can't read it because I'm going to stumble all over it. The Lord God made all the kinds of trees that grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden were the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. When the woman saw the tree of the fruit that was pleasing for the eye, she saw that it was also desirable for gaining wisdom. So she took some and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband, who was there with her, and he ate it. And then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were both naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and wife heard the sound of the Lord God walking through the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. So that's sin entering the world. You guys are familiar with this story, I'm sure. I'm going to jump ahead real quick. God comes and confronts man, and he delivers these curses. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, but I want to run through it again. It's Genesis 3:17 through 19. Cursed is the ground. This is God speaking. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. And you will eat the plants of the field by the sweat of your brow. You will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. From dust you are, and dust you will return. So that's Genesis. That's basically the fall of man right there. I'm sure you guys, man and woman, right? I'm being sexist, sorry. But yeah, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this story. But you can see God comes down. He explains that we are now disconnected from him in some very important ways, some very significant ways, and now our lives are going to be very different. And he explains that now we're going to have to work the ground. It's called a curse in the Bible. When I was a kid, I actually thought this only applied to farmers. I don't know if you guys were there with me. I thought oh well, farmers' lives suck now because sorry guys. But if you've read a commentary or are smarter than me as a child, you probably know that no, this is actually a larger commentary. It's a commentary on work, right? Work, especially the ground, was connected to everybody's way of life back in the day, and honestly, it's still connected to our way of life. We're very far removed from it. Even if you're a programmer or a doctor or something, you don't work the ground, but your way of life, the way you sustain yourself, is very connected to working the ground. So this is actually a commentary on work. And what does it mean? Well, it means thorns and thistles, right? Yeah, that's an ugly picture. Sorry. We don't have to look at that. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how those got in there. I'm sorry. Thorns, there we go. So thorns and thistles. I think we still experience thorns and thistles in our daily lives. And I don't think we call them thorns. We don't call them thistles. I think we just call them things like mistakes or delays or errors. I get into the office in the morning, and I have maybe 3 things I want to do when I start the day. There's days where I walk out of the office and I've only done one of them. It's very frustrating. There's things that happen, things break on me, things take longer than I expected. People I'm trusting to deliver for me, to complete my job, fail me. Those are thorns, those are thistles. That's what I consider our modern day thorns. Point is, thorns suck. So when I was a kid, I thought this was all sort of work equaled sin in a weird way. We weren't going to work in heaven. This is kind of why. I was like, oh, well, God said you have to work the field now. And they used to be in the garden. They used to be able to eat whatever they wanted. That wasn't a problem before. Well, there's something I missed when I was 15. And that's verse 15 of chapter 2. And it says, the Lord God took man and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work and care for him. This is, like I said, chapter 2. This is 20 verses before the fall. So what does that mean? When I read this for the first time as a kid, I was like, well, wait a minute. Why is God telling us to work to feel? Like, doesn't he understand that work is evil? Like, I don't get it. Like, is it that work isn't evil? I'm sure my youth pastor slapped me upside the head or something. He's like, yeah, like, work's not evil. Like, you guys might have already reached that point, that conclusion already. Congratulations, you're smarter than I was. But I wonder if we've all properly meditated on this. I think some of us realize, like, work's not bad, but have we meditated on what that means for our lives? God's original design for work was good. I'll continue through my story. When I came out of college, when I came out of high school and I went to college, I started to stress about what I wanted to do for work. I ended up getting an English degree. And I realized in my senior year that I didn't know what I wanted to do with an English degree. A lot of my fellow students were going on to be teachers, and I just thought that sounded like the worst thing to do with your life. No offense to teachers, but that was just not something I wanted to do at all. Just standing in front of people and teaching, that sounds terrible. I actually started to stress out about what I wanted to do for work, what I wanted to do for a career. And I started to stress out about so much because I didn't want to miss out on God's blessings. I didn't want to choose the wrong career or do something that God didn't want me to do, right? Like I think we've all been there. I stressed out about this so much that I eventually reached a breaking point. I had a friend of mine in college, and he's a very smart man, and he's kind of a mentor to me. And he said, Ben, you're worrying about this choice so much, but I wonder if to God this decision is really like, what do you want on your pizza? I was like, I took a minute to think about that. I was like, I think what he's getting at is some of these decisions we've tried to make, some of these things that we've placed so much weight on, to God, they're kind of not that significant. I think to God, he cares about the choices, the way, the things we do through the choices, how we're choosing to follow him in the midst of the choices we make rather than the choice itself. Because God can honestly bless me in no matter what career I chose. If I decided I wanted to go into programming, which I was kind of thinking about, he could have blessed me in that. He could have blessed me if I decided to be a teacher. He could have blessed me if I continued to pursue writing. That didn't matter. What mattered to God is how I followed him in the midst of those decisions. So when I realized, work isn't maybe as stressful as I need to make it. There's no one correct work. There's no one correct job for me. God enjoys watching us make decisions, I think. He doesn't care if we have cheese or pepperoni pizza, but he cares about how we pursue him in the midst of that. So I continued to pursue an English degree. I graduated. Congrats to me. I ended up thinking, if I'm going to graduate with an English degree, maybe I could pursue journalism. And I wasn't super hot on journalism, but I thought if I'm going to be a journalist, maybe if I wrote about something I was really passionate about, that could be really cool. And I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a big fan of video games. I have been for a long time. And so I thought, there's magazines out there that just cover video games. That could be really cool. I was a big fan of magazines like Nintendo Power, ETM, Game Informer. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them. So I thought, man, if I could be an editor at a magazine like that, that's what I want to do. But it took me 2 years of hounding my current boss, and somehow I eventually got an interview at Game Informer magazine. It's actually based here in Minnesota, which is really weird. I don't know why we put up with this winter. But I started in September of 2006, so it's almost 12 years now, which is cool. And surprising, I can't believe it's been almost 12 years. A couple months after I started, my boss actually walked up to me with a sheet of papers. It was this thick, I want to say. He said, hey, this guy, he's been kind of applying, seems qualified. I'm curious what you think of him. He's handed it to me. It was all of my resumes. It was the resumes I'd sent him over the course of 2 years. It was just kind of interesting to see how my qualifications had evolved over the course of 2 years. I don't know what the walk away point with that is. You just need to hound your boss and you'll eventually get your job or not. But it worked for me. But I feel incredibly blessed in this job, honestly. It's a cool job. And if you guys aren't familiar with it, it's helped me grow as a thinker and a writer. I feel like I've had a ton of once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. I've had the opportunity to travel the world, and I would not have had the opportunity to travel to all these places without this job. I've had the opportunity to interview game developers, game writers, game programmers, and talk to them over a beer, just like really casual, like super insider conversations in the industry that personally to me are super fascinating. I've gotten the opportunity to write cover stories. I wrote this one. This is just back in November. You guys hopefully are familiar with Mega Man. He's pretty popular. It's his 25th year anniversary actually this year. So I wrote 25 pages on Mega Man, the history and the upcoming Mega Man 11 is due out this year. And I never would have had that opportunity without this job. I've been the first person in the world to play some games, which is really cool. I even had my face scanned in and put into a game once, which for a video game fan is like a dream come true, right? Somebody once told me that there are actually more professional NFL players than there are full-time game journalists. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a real journalist. I'm not going to research that, but the point is, I've been lucky, right? And this is a rare opportunity. I feel incredibly blessed. And yeah, I'm bragging a little bit. And I'm bragging because I want to emphasize how cool my job is, because I also want to tell you that some days I go in, my job sucks. Like, there are still thorns and there are still thistles, and like, I go in and I'm stressed out and all I want to do is go home and play video games. I feel incredibly lucky because I got a dream job when I was incredibly young. But after I got that dream job, I just kept dreaming, right? I kept having new things that I wanted to aspire to. And it felt like my job, as cool as it was, as much opportunity as I had in it, like it still wasn't fulfilling me inside. I still feel those thorns and thistles. And so, as somebody who feels burdened by work still in a really cool job, I kept coming back to that question I asked myself when I was 15. Is what is work going to look like when we're in heaven? Like, what is the point of work? So, I want to take you guys on a small little detour. It's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I think is really cool, and I want to share with you guys. But it's actually redeemed work in my view in a lot of ways, and that's talking about play. So several years ago, I got an opportunity to interview some people experienced in the world of play. I wrote this article. It's called Why We Play. I know the title kind of obscures it, but it's basically about why we play, about why we as humans play. It's like why we desire to play games, why we like to have fun, which probably sounds like a dumb thing to write about. It's like, well, play's fun, but I think there's something more there, and I kind of wanted to know what that more was. So I interviewed these psychologists, people who study games and study games for a living, and I wanted to talk to them about why we're drawn to games. And when I talk about games, I just want to clarify, I'm not talking about Minecraft and Fortnite. I am talking about those, but I'm not just talking about those. I'm talking about all types of games. So I'm talking about sports, I'm talking about card games, I'm talking about checkers, apples to apples, like games, broad category. Why do we like games? I think this is pretty fascinating. So this is, and I know it seems like a bit of a detour where I'm supposed to be talking about work, but I think it's relevant, so hold on. These psychologists told me that games appeal to us for three primary reasons. There's these psychological needs that we all feel. You could call them desires of the soul, if you want to get real poetic, but they're invisible psychological needs. And the first one is a need for competence. And this need for competence, it's a desire to seek out control or feel mastery over a situation. It's why we like to feel successful. It's why we like to feel like we're growing and progressing. It's why we like to take on new knowledge, right? We like to have accomplishments. Play is actually really good at making us feel all those things. That's one psychological need. Second psychological need is a need for autonomy. This is a desire to feel independent. We like to feel like we have control over our own actions. This need actually pervades a lot of things, and even if you feel like, oh, I don't like to be in control, I think you do in ways that you don't understand. This need for autonomy is why we don't like being manipulated. We don't want to be controlled. We want to have control. We don't want to be imprisoned. That's why prison is a punishment, is because this need for autonomy. That's why slavery is a problem. Why slavery is wrong, right? This need for autonomy. Games are actually really good at that too. They're really good at making us feel autonomous. And the third thing is a need for relatedness. We like to feel like we matter to people. We like to feel like we are a significant contribution to society. There's a 2003 study I found, and this article I wrote is a little bit older, so this study's older, but the University of Massachusetts in 2003, they discovered that people with altruistic tendencies, they generally have higher levels of mental health and less overall stress in their life. Just because they have a lot of good relationships, right? Well, guess what? I mean, games are good at making us feel related as well. I mean, anybody who's played a board games, you got to play that with other people. And the fascinating thing, I think, is even video games where you're playing by yourself, you're interacting with a digital person, those games actually kind of scratch that itch as well. This is interesting. So those are our three needs. We like to feel confident. We like to feel autonomous. We like to feel related. I don't want to say those are all of our needs, all of our psychological needs, but those are three big ones. And games are really good at scratching that itch. So here's the important part, and why I'm talking about this. I was interviewing a guy named Scott Rigby. He runs a company, he founded a company called Immersive. They do research for the video game industry. He supplies all of this information to video game makers and says, like, here's how to make your games better, to make them, more, kind of fill these needs a little bit more. I was talking to him, and he said something that was kind of offhand at the time, but to me it kind of stuck with me. He said, games aren't the only thing that fulfills these psychological needs. These psychological needs can also be met through things like school and work. He went on to say, we often think of play as the opposite of work. They're kind of opposites in our culture, like big and small, like hot and cold. Those are opposite words, right? Play, work tend to be opposites. But from a psychological human needs perspective, that's not the case. In fact, play is actually an idealized form of work. Play is work that we like to do. So, for me, as a Christian, that kind of stopped me in my tracks. I was like, play is work we like to do. And I started to realize something, and I started to think about God's original vision for us and what work looked like. And I began to think that, you know what? God created us with these invisible needs, and he created work to fulfill those needs. That's the beauty of this. God created us to desire and be fulfilled by work. If you remove the thorns and thistles from our daily work, it might look a little bit something like play. This is obviously me talking. I didn't get this out of the Bible, but it's something that I found while kind of examining humanity and the way we tick. And I think it's kind of fascinating because I think if we examine play, that might give us a little window into God's original vision for work. And I don't want to praise play too much. I don't want to say play is not affected by sin. I think it is. I think we do approach play in ways we shouldn't. I just think it's unique in that it gives us an interesting view of what play might look like in heaven. Play could look like work without thorns. If you guys feel burdened by work today, maybe you guys can take some relief in that. I have. I think if you think that comparing work and play is absurd, I'm kind of with you, honestly. I could be wrong, You guys can come visit me in the ghetto of heaven if you want when we're up there. But I want to take a minute and kind of examine like what those could look like and why they're kind of similar for a second, because I think it's valuable. If you boil down the raw elements of the job, let's say you have a job where you're managing resources, right? You're trying to dialogue with people and work out an equitable exchange. You're trying to use those resources and the talents you have to complete a project to build a new thing. Like, that's work in kind of a nutshell. It also sounds like play. It sounds like a couple of games. I mean, those are just a couple. If you really boil it down, right, to its raw elements. Here's another example, because I like examples. Let's say you're a warehouse manager, and your job, you work for Amazon or something, your job is to squeeze all of the optimal space out of your warehouse. You're arranging all the boxes, you have to physically pick them up, move them around. There's new boxes coming into the warehouse every day, there's new boxes or old boxes going out. It sounds like just super stressful, very monotonous. I don't think you can make a game out of it. Actually, you can. You maybe have played it, I don't know. My point is, a lot of the things we hate about our jobs, we hate about work, those may actually be thorns and thistles in your life. Because we were designed by God with invisible needs, invisible desires, and work is meant to satisfy those. So how can we change our attitude towards work? Well, it's a good question. I don't know, I don't want to claim to have all the answers, but I have some ideas. I would say, oh yeah, these are funny. This is how we sometimes approach work. I think play provides a window into what redeemed work can be. And so how do we approach that today? How do we get there? How do we have a better attitude about our workplace? I don't think it means that we need to gamify our workplace. I don't think it means we need to start playing Call of Duty on our work computer. I think we just need to reframe our lens for what gospel work means. So to do that, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. To do that, to reframe our vision for what gospel work means, we need to go back to Genesis 2:15. I mentioned that earlier. It's the verse I looked at. This is 20 verses before the fall. This is God putting us in earth for the first time. First command he gives us is, hey, I want you to go work. The Lord God took man and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and care for it. Well, there's one interesting fact about gardens, and they're not wilderness. That's an interesting fact. They're not. Like, God created the world, right? He could have created it however he wanted. He creates it in a certain way. He creates it wild in a lot of ways. Puts animals all over the place. It's teeming with life. And then when he's done, chapter 2, he comes back and he tends a garden. He creates a garden and he puts man inside it. I don't think God's creative streak stopped after the seventh day. I think this implies that God doesn't like to see a static world. In fact, God likes to see his world grow and change and flower. And what's amazing about that is what God does after he creates the garden is he puts man inside of it. And then he says, you get to continue my creation. You get to continue to tend my garden. God is inviting us into the job that he started. Isn't that cool? Like, that's really cool to me. I know for all of our failings, for all of our stupidity, for all of the dumb things we've done to this planet, we've done some really cool things as well. Right? I mean, we've brought species back from the brink of extinction. We've sent them there, but we also brought some back. We've developed tiny machines that can be planted inside of a heart to keep it beating, keep people alive. We've invented this crazy network, this communication network that spans the globe. So people, families on two different sides of the planet can talk to each other and they can see each other face to face. Like, that's pretty cool. We actually have the entire catalog of human knowledge at our fingertips and it's in our pocket, like, those are some crazy things. And I'm not saying those all came without cost, and maybe there's a better way to get there with some of that. But I think God looks at some of our accomplishments and smiles. Like, I think he's happy. If you actually chart the Bible, you start at Genesis, you guys have probably heard this, but you start at Genesis, it starts with a garden. You go to Revelation, it ends with a city surrounded by a giant tree. I think God likes to see that trajectory. God likes to see us continue to care for his creation. So I started the talk by comparing games and work because I wanted us to reframe our attitude towards work. But the job we've been given by God is actually cooler than any game we can play. We get to tend God's creation. He put us in his garden as caretakers. I don't know what that looks like for you guys. I think sometimes it may look like picking up litter from a park. I think sometimes that might look like being mindful of your resources, recycling, not wasting gas or electricity. Sometimes it might mean encouraging ethical farming practices. I'm not trying to stand up here on a soapbox. I just think this is actually what tending God's creation looks like. I think it means adding to human flourishing. I think it means building meaningful relationships with people in need, people who don't have much, and actually building them up, training them, and sending them out so that they can do the same thing, so that they can teach others, so that they can continue to tend God's creation. And also, maybe most importantly, sometimes it means taking your unique skill set into the workplace and encouraging your employers, encouraging your coworkers to fight for creation, to fight for human flourishing. And I don't know what that looks like in your workplace, because you all have different workplaces. But I think it's worth meditating on, it's worth praying, it's worth spending time with God and asking him, like, what am I for? Why am I here in this place? And how can I bless you? How can I glorify you and worship you in my job? If you still feel like you hate your job, you might be too focused on the thorns. Because work isn't bad. In fact, God designed work to actually be joyful for us, to be enjoyable for us. I think you can see that through play. God has actually given us a job that's more exciting than anything we could imagine. So, I know it's early, but I'm ready to take a break if you guys are. I have an application question. You guys can think about, how can I work towards God's calling for my life in my workplace? So we can take, I don't know, we got plenty of time. 10, 15, what do we normally take?
10 minutes is good.
10 minutes? Why don't you guys talk about this? You guys can obviously snack and whatnot, but talk about this. I'd be curious to hear what you guys think when we come back. Break! Questions or thoughts from the last talk, and we want to share them? Any interesting discussions during the group? Yes. You guys are all speechless.
Mortis.
We
Way in the back, they're really tracking you.
were talking about the video that had us watch, the one called Multiple Expressions or something like that. And we were like, what if we think we're doing like kind of the calling, but we've been doing it for a while, maybe like 10 years or something. We're getting sick of it. Does that mean that we just need to look for a different expression of kind of similar work, or does it just mean we're rubbing up against the same thorns over and over every day, and we're like tired of the thorns? What do you
Sure. Are you asking for a friend? Yeah. I can maybe speak into your life. I don't know about everybody else's. And this is a good thought. Maybe would be my answer. I mean, if you've been doing something for 10 years, I'm not surprised you'd be getting tired of it. So I liked what she was saying in that video of, you know, I have one calling. And what I would kind of where I would lean with that is like we all have one calling, and that's tending God's creation. And I think that's a pretty broad umbrella. So I think she kind of narrowed it down a little bit more, which I don't think is bad. It might actually be helpful in your own lives to kind of narrow that down. Like, what's my personal calling? Man, I'm ashamed to say I haven't done that myself, but it might help you kind of navigate. Like, okay, I've done this for 10 years. Where do I want to go next? Where do I feel called to move on to next? I'm still called to essentially the same thing, but I feel I need to express it differently. I like what she's saying. I think that perfectly answered that question. Anybody else?
Say things and not ask
Yeah,
questions.
you can say things and not ask questions. Even better.
Sweet. So yeah, we were talking in our group about how like my grandfather worked at General Motors for 60 years, and then he retired. There was a big sense of duty going to work, coming back from work, and then again going to work and coming back from work, and that was something that he did no matter how he felt. And that was what it was. Same company the whole entire life. And then we flipped to the millennials, and now we favor and we need purpose in our work, and we need it to the nth degree, and everything needs to be perfect. The workplace environment has to be exactly this. And you look at the amount of years that millennials spend in jobs in general, and it's like a 30th of what my grandfather did. You know, so we were trying to talk about, okay, at what point, and there's a couple guys in our group that recently changed jobs or thinking about it, so at what point is it too far? And like, we know we need to go work, and work is a good thing, and sometimes it's not going to be easy. But like at the same time, I do want to find that purpose. We were trying to delineate like where like is the breaking point, if there is one. Yeah, so not focusing on the thorns too much, but like working through those thorns sometimes is needed. But are those thorns too much? So it was really helpful discussion, and
Yeah, that sounds great.
I think I have an answer. I
Was
know
there
there's a
an answer
question,
to
but got an answer.
Well, so society has changed, so that'd be the first thing I'd say. So someone that worked for General Motors or whatever for 30 years, General Mills here in the Twin Cities, 30 years ago, companies did not fire people. 30 years ago, companies had pension plans. 30 years ago, they took care of their employees. And our society has changed to become profit-driven completely. And so companies now are wondering why their employees are not loyal. It's because the companies themselves are not loyal.
Right.
So what I wouldn't be so hard on yourselves as millennials. I would actually be harder on the society and the business community that surrounds us now, because they don't value people as much as they did a number of years ago. So maybe that's thorns, maybe that's just the way things are now, and the fact that right now we're in a great employment situation. So Minneapolis happens to be under structural unemployment, so more jobs than there are people. So if you don't like what you're doing, switch. Easy to do.
Yeah.
It's not always
kind of
like
going
that.
back to that too. It's like you don't need to stay where you are necessarily.
Yeah.
But
So-
I hope if you're just like constantly job hopping, that's maybe there's something going on there and you shouldn't be job hopping. Maybe
Well,
you're too
part of
concerned.
it is finding something that suits you, whether it's a calling or pleasurable for you in terms of what you do or whatever it is. I would never, and I had positions of authority or whatever, I would never advocate for any of my folks to stay in a role that they absolutely hate.
Sure.
It's like, we're not here to suffer. I mean, we get suffering enough.
Yeah.
But especially in today's environment, there's no reason.
Good. Good thoughts. Cool. Unless anybody else has something to bring and share, which you do.
I have a question,
Yeah.
more of like what we were talking about and something that was coming up. Not necessarily about the previously the discussion question
yeah.
that you showed.
So
Well,
I'm
I
very
guess-
qualified to answer this for you.
So I was just thinking about like what relationship is there between play and then like, because I guess play might be a subset of fiction in some cases, like video games or other
Sure.
board games, and then like art, like so
Oh,
all
sure.
of that, how that might relate together. If you have any thoughts.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I spend as much time thinking about that. there might be a connection there. I think video games are in a unique spot where they kind of touch on, I think, consider them art, and you can boo me if you want, but yeah, so I think there's an element there, like we're obviously intended to be creative people, so I think that's part of what God's work is creation, and that is inherently a artistic endeavor, you could say. So there are jobs that are artistic. So there is bleed over there. I would say yes. Is that it? Yes.
I'm actually a recreation therapist, so I love what you're talking about right now. And play is more. I mean, I think of it more as a mindset when I'm working, like exploring how play can be a role in personal growth and caring for mental health. So if you think of play as like a mindset, when you're like in the zone and there's like freedom that comes from it and some kind of intrinsic value, intrinsic gain or reward, it comes in creativity in art or like when you're like out in nature or when you're playing a video game or a board game. I think it's more of it can be at work, when you're playing a prank on a coworker. So I think that it can be. I like to think of it as a mindset.
Yeah.
So that very much fits what you're talking about.
Sure. Yeah.
Play being like our best ideal state of work.
Right. I think my main thing that I hope you guys walked away with is our view of work has really been tainted for a long time. I mean, really since we've all been born, right? The only people who experienced work before the fall were Adam and Eve. So they're the only people who have kind of understood what maybe God's original idea was for that. So I almost wish we had another word for it, because I feel like what we're experiencing right now really isn't work. It's not work in the true sense. Kind of getting back to what maybe some of you guys are talking about. Cool. Well, I think maybe we'll leave a little bit of time at the end too for more questions or thoughts or whatever if you guys want to share. But so we're kind of wrapping up. I want to get into the second half of work, Gospel Centered Work, Part 2. Blank slide. I don't know what that's about. Okay, there we go. The Reckoning. I don't know why I called it that. I just thought it was funny. But as we were talking about kind of our idea of work, how we should view work today, how the gospel should affect our. We haven't talked a lot about the gospel. I think it's definitely there. I assume we're all coming from a place that the gospel should influence our work and what Jesus' sacrifice did. But definitely work is not the ideal. We're definitely not there. And we talked about what that ideal should look like a little bit, but we're not there, and so how do we deal with this? How do we deal when we're not in the ideal? That's my poetic way of saying it. Well, as I was thinking about this, I kind of came up with a list of 4 different things, 4 different ways that I think we can approach work here today. You're supposed to come up with lists when you're doing a talk, and so I came up with a list. I didn't bring this list off of a mountain. It's not chiseled in stone, so I don't know how ordained it is. You can take it with a grain of salt if you want. These are my ideas, the things I'm bringing to this, and it helped me in the way I approach work today, this side of heaven. Hopefully they'll help you. But the first one I want to talk about is God uses our work to shape us and teach us. I think God is using our work, flawed as it is, full of thorns and thistles, to shape and teach us. Even more so, maybe because of the thorns and thistles, right? I want to tell you guys about a friend of mine named Daniel. Daniel was a kid from the East Coast. He actually moved across the country when he was in high school. He was from a single-family home with his mom, grew up with his mom. They were really poor. So when he got out to California, he kind of didn't feel like he fit in. He was getting picked on a lot. There were a group of bullies that were kind of always messing around with him. Well, one day he meets this older guy. He's an older gentleman. He's a tutor. He seems very wise, and he's like, "I'm going to help you out." And so Daniel agrees to go to his home after school and begin learning from him, right? And so this guy, he immediately puts him to work. And he has him starting painting his fences and sanding his floors. This older gentleman was actually a bit of a car collector. So he has him washing his cars. It doesn't take long before my friend Daniel, he he gets fed up with it and he says, man, you said you'd help me, but you have me doing all your chores. You're treating me like I'm your slave. And this older gentleman, he says, look, you think this is all for nothing, but it's not really what it seems, right? Show me how I told you how to stand before. And Daniel shows him the crazy motions that this guy had showed him. And then he's like, all right, show me how I told you to wax on, wax up. And Daniel does the motion, and this older gentleman, this very wise gentleman, he shows him these motions, and Daniel begins to understand, like, oh, I wasn't just doing work. This guy, my master, was actually teaching me through my toil. I didn't understand it at the time, but I was actually building up muscle memory so I could come and cry. Daniel didn't understand in the moment, but his master was using his labor to teach him for a greater purpose. Now is our master shaping us? We have the greatest sensei in the world, in the universe, right? He's not going to waste the toil we experience. He's going to use that. He's going to teach us. And you know what? Work's not supposed to be comfortable on this side of heaven. It's just not. Like there are thorns and thistles. We talked about that. But I think God can use it. And I think just understanding that it's not supposed to be comfortable, that we're not going to be comfortable, that every day we go into work, it's not going to be just fun and games, like that's helpful. It's been helpful for me. So that's my first point is God uses our work to teach us. Point 2 is I think good work is worship. So what do I mean by that? I think God is honored by good work. I think God values quality, actually. I want to look at Colossians 3 real quick. This is a book written by Paul, and I think it talks a little bit about work. For reference, in this section of the letter leading up to Colossians 3, Paul's been talking about how as Christians we've been crucified with Christ and how our old lives have died and we've now been resurrected with Christ, so we experience a new, fuller life. We have a portion of the new fullness of life. So we get to experience at least partially what that new life will be, and I think that applies to our work as well. The words Paul uses, and that is small, I'm sorry. It's Colossians 3, 9 through 10, if you guys will follow along. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and put on a new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of the image of its creator. There is no Jew or Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. I'm going to jump ahead. 12 verses later, he has this to say. He says, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. And do it not when their eyes are on you to curry favor, but with sincerity of heart and with reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. I think the important part there is slaves, obey your masters in everything you do. I think that's very interesting. I think I don't want to go too deep on commentary on slavery in Rome, ancient Rome. I'm going to assume that most of us kind of understand that it's a little bit different than our modern view of slavery, than the slavery that we've sort of experienced in the last several centuries. I will note that many historians have estimated that 90% of the population back in ancient Rome were either slaves or descended from slaves. Maybe you guys are familiar with that. So this was like a wide swath of the population. This verse would have resonated very well. I also want to say that slavery in ancient Rome was pretty broad, right? It was a pretty broad category. It could refer to people working in agriculture, people mining. It could refer to people who ran households for the rich and famous. They were famous, yeah. It could refer to gladiators. There were even bookkeepers and physicians who were slaves, believe it or not. So again, very broad, very all-encompassing kind of sense. So Paul's talking about work, and I think we can all agree that slavery is like the worst kind of work, right? Because it's work you're forced to do, and I hesitate to call it work because it's slavery, right? It's cringeworthy a little bit. In spite of all that, Paul still says, "Obey your earthly masters with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord." And I find that fascinating. Dorothy Sayers, if you guys are familiar with her, she was a famed English writer and poet. She put it this way: the church's approach to an intelligent carpenter is usually confined to exhorting him to not be drunk and disorderly in his leisurely hours, and to come to church on Sundays. What the church should be telling him is that the very first demand his religion makes upon him is that he should make good tables. She continues here: church by all means, and decent forms of amusement, certainly, but excuse me. But what use is all of that if at the very center of life and occupation he is insulting God with bad carpentry? No crooked table or legs or ill-fitting drawers ever, I dare swear, came out of the carpenter's shop in Nazareth. Nor, if they did, could anyone believe that they were made by the same hand that made heaven and earth. No piety in the worker will compensate for work that is not true to self. For any work that is untrue in its own technique is a living lie. That's from Dorothy Sayers' essay on why work. It's pretty good if you want to read it. The part I really love is insulting God with bad carpentry. Is it insulting to God to actually do bad work? And Dorothy seems to think so. I think God values quality. Just look at the intricacy of his world. Just look at the amazing beauty there. That was a skilled craftsman. It's very ornate and magical. It's surprising. God put a lot of care into his world. And then remember what happened? He asked us to tend it. He asked us to continue this. You guys ever gone to a beautiful park? You're walking through, and then just this waft of stink just hits you in the face, just smacks you upside. Yeah, could be a skunk. I was thinking it was trash, actually. It's because a bunch of people littered in the park and didn't clean up after it. That's bad tending. Somebody created something beautiful, and then somebody didn't care for it. I think you get the same sense when you hold something like just uniquely and profoundly well made in your hands. Whatever it is, it could be a thing, it could be a cigar, I don't know if you're into that, it could be, just an iPod even. Like something that's really well made. There's a beauty there, right? Doesn't even have to come from a Christian, but you can just sense that there's something there. Like the person cared about what they were doing. And then the person on the receiving end gets blessed by it. They weren't even the recipient of it. That's what we get to do in our work. We get to bless other people through our quality work. I think God values quality. I don't even care if you're producing a physical product, because you might not be, right? A lot of us work in jobs where we're producing digital goods. Or maybe we're just producing ideas, or maybe we're producing relationships. There's a lot of different outputs for this, but I think whatever it is, whatever you're doing, whatever you're really good at, you should be focusing on the quality of it. Good work is worship. The third thing that I look at, how we can approach work today, is we are uniquely suited to our own jobs. And speaking of suits, Here's an interesting fact about playing cards. How's that for a transition? Do you guys know that a deck of playing cards holds 52 cards? Yeah, you probably do. But do you guys know that if you shuffle that deck, you end up with actually a unique order of cards that may never have existed before? And I know that sounds ridiculous, but there's 52 unique cards, and the actual number of possible orders of cards is obscenely high for that, right? It's actually 8 times 10 to the 67th power, and it looks like that many zeros. Yeah, it takes a really long time. They actually estimate that there are fewer stars in the universe than possible number of deck combinations. Weird. Isn't that weird? This is the math. We can run through that real quick. I would do that. Yeah, so what's the point of that? We all have our own unique deck of skills, talents, attributes, interests. God has given us a unique set of skills. We are all special snowflakes. Just like your mom told me. I actually believe that. And I think God has placed you in your workplace. You are uniquely suited to do what you do wherever you are. So even if you hate your job, there might be something you can do. Even if you have 2 weeks left in that job, you can do something that nobody else can do in that job. And God can help you through that. Excuse me. All right. So maybe you're in a place where you can develop a relationship with somebody that nobody else would develop. Maybe you're the only person who's going to catch a mistake that nobody else on your team would. I don't know what it is, but you have those unique skill sets. And I think when a lot of people hear about, like, I'm uniquely suited to pursue relationships in my workplace, they probably think about evangelism. So I want to talk about that just for a minute. And I think evangelism in the workplace is good, right? I'm not going to come out against that. But I hope you don't shy away from that. But at the same time, I hope you don't see evangelism in the workplace as like your only goal. I think some of us hear evangelism in the workplace and we think of that. This is how we feel, right? I think you're uniquely skilled in the workplace to pursue those relationships, and I hope you do. But if that's your priority, if you're using work as a platform for evangelism, then it devalues your work. It narrows your work, and it's unfulfilling. The work has value on itself. Now, I don't want to say evangelism is bad. I don't want to use this as an out to like not evangelize in the workplace, because I think honestly, probably more of us look for any excuse we can to not evangelize, right? I think the gospel is important and meaningful, and hopefully it just springs right out of you. Hopefully it's affecting your work, and I think it should affect your work more than anything else. So I hope you're intentional with the relationships you have at work. You're uniquely suited to be there. Remember, like, what does that mean for you? You go into work. Is this how you feel? Hopefully not. For me, I don't know if you guys know this, I'm Christian. I don't really proclaim it too much in my writing. Like, I work for a video game magazine. We're not a Christian magazine. I'm not supposed to. I don't really talk about it on our podcast. I don't really talk about it on Twitter. And yet somehow 3 or 4 times throughout my career, people have emailed me and said, hey, I think you might be a Christian. I asked you a couple questions about that. I think you're a Christian. What do you think it's like working in the video game industry and being a Christian? Which kind of floored me. And I'm surprised this happened more than once. And I'm not even making that up. And I'm not using myself as an example like, hey, I've done an amazing job. But I think if you are doing work and glorifying God in your work, that's going to shine through. I think our work should be bulletproof to insults from other people. And by that I mean our work is so good, we're praising God in our work that people aren't going to be like, oh, you know what? Ben, he kind of smells, his jokes are bad, but man, he's a good worker. Like, I think that's a good compliment. I think that's meaningful, right? People don't have to like you, but are we producing good work? I hope so. You're uniquely suited for your workplace. All right, number 4 is work is a gift from God. Even with all the thorns and thistles right now, I think it's still a gift. I want to look at Ephesians real quick. Or sorry, Ecclesiastes, different book. 2:24 through 25. It says, a person can do no better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? I think this is really interesting. A person can do no better than to find satisfaction in their own toil? Well, that's bold. What's even crazier is this is the Old Testament, right? This is pre-Jesus. What are they thinking, right? I think it's a bold claim. So I want to explore like how God created us to be. I think we've already explored that, right? How God created work, how we should be approaching work in the ideal, how we're not there yet, how we have these invisible desires that should meet our needs for work, but we're not in the ideal. I've been spending most of this talk talking about how we can have a better view of work. I think a lot of us don't have that problem sometimes. I think a lot of us don't have the problem of not wanting to go to work. Some of us have the problem of maybe working too much. I think sometimes some of us have found jobs that are uniquely suited at scratching those invisible needs. And they're actually doing too good a job. And so we're too obsessed and we're too into what we're doing and we're finding our worth through that work. And I think that's the danger of going too far in that direction, is finding value there and it becomes an idol. Because finding joy in your work isn't bad, I don't want to say that. But what are you working for? Are you working for that joy? Are you working for that sense of accomplishment? Or are you working because are you giving that joy to God? And saying, thank you, God, for creating me to be this way and for giving me the job I have, and that I have the opportunity to bless you and worship you in my job. One of the videos you guys watched from Timothy Keller talks about leaf by niggle. That's a J.R.R. Tolkien story. He actually explores it a little bit more in more detail in his book Every Good Endeavor, which is a really good book on this topic. I recommend reading it if you haven't. But in case you're not super familiar with the story or need a refresher, Leaf by Niggle, it's about an artist named Niggle. He lives in a world that doesn't value art, but he's an artist. And so he pursues his art because he finds joy in it. And he has this vision of this tree. It's an amazing, beautiful tree. It's gigantic. It has amazing leaves that just sort of shimmer in the sun. And off behind the tree in the far distance is this big forest. And it just looks so inviting and so magical. He just wants to go explore it. And so he decides he's going to try to paint this picture because he finds it so just amazing and inviting that he wants to show other people. So he begins painting it, and he discards all his other paintings, all his other work, and he's focused on this, but things keep coming up, he gets distracted, he has a neighbor that kind of needs constant attention, he's kind of helping him out, and he's a good guy, he's trying to do his best, but other things keep getting in the way. And throughout his life, he only ever really gets one leaf drawn. This must be it. Found it online. But he only gets the one leaf drawn. And near the end of the story, he ends up having to take a trip across country to this far-off land. And it's J.R.R. Tolkien, so there's kind of an analogy here. And he's not super outright about it, but you kind of get the sense that he's going to heaven in the story. So he goes to heaven, and he's kind of sad, he's kind of somewhat somber about the fact that he was only ever able to get this one leaf drawn, and he worked so hard, he had this vision for this tree. But then he gets to the land, this far off country, and he gets hit by this beautiful view of this tree. he's like, oh my gosh, this is the tree I envisioned for so long. This is it. And he sees the forest off in the distance, and it's all real. He has this revelation. He's like, oh, I was working for so long on this thing. It was kind of this picture I got of heaven, and it's a real place. And now I'm here. And now I get to actually continue to work on that beauty. And I kind of wonder if are we like Miguel sometimes? Are we sometimes too focused on that leaf we're drawing? Are we sometimes too focused on what we're doing, and we don't realize that there's a greater heaven? That's actually, the work we're doing now is connected to a larger picture. It's connected to stuff that God wants us to do in heaven. C.S. Lewis also talks about the idea of a far-off country. His book, Way to Glory. Giving you guys a lot of book suggestions. Hopefully you can have a lot of reading time. Lewis talks about this idea of this far-off country and how we try to fulfill ourselves with our entertainment and our art and our work. He says we're trying to pursue these things, these beautiful things. He calls it beauty. But really it's a larger intangible longing that we're trying to fulfill. We have this complete incompleteness, this desire because of our separation with God, and that's what we're trying to fulfill. And this is from the Weight of Glory. In speaking in this desire for our own far-off country, which we find ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. I'm almost committing to an indecency. I'm trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you. The secret which hurts so much that you take revenge on it by naming it things like nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. The secret which also pierces with such sweetness that when in the very intimate conversation, the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves. The secret we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we desire to do both. We cannot tell it because it is a desire for something that has never actually appeared in our experience. C.S. Lewis is talking about this greater longing we feel that we try to pursue and fill with beauty and fulfillment and work. It's kind of insidious, though. It's a mistake because we try to do that and we're never going to fulfill it with the things we have here. We have this urge we keep scratching at, but the work you do, it's like scratching an itch that's not going to go away, right? Lewis continues, he says, the books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust it to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was the longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past. They're good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the heart of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are not they are only a scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. And I think this is very profound in the context of work, right? As we approach work, we try to use work to fulfill us. I wonder if you guys are you working for God? Or are you working for your job? Does your job fulfill you too much that it's become an idol? Because work is a gift. God's given you a gift, and He wants to bless you with it, but He's ultimately the one who gave it to you, and I think we need to recognize who the origin of that gift is from. So yeah, those are my 4 points. God uses our work to teach us and shape us. God, good work is worship. Sorry, I had written down wrong. God wants, you're uniquely suited for our jobs. Work is a gift from God. And obviously society is being secretly overrun by celestial gifts. So yeah, that's those are my points. That's my talk. These are my application questions. I hope you guys kind of walk away with this and think about this and talk about this in your groups. How is my work a gift from God? how can I worship Him better through the quality of my work? And we might be done early, so I don't know if you guys are signing up. We can take another break. We can do a QA time. Does anybody have questions?
Yeah, let's
Or
do
comments?
some Q&A, and then I've got a few announcements, and then maybe you guys can take some time to discuss those questions in your cohort group. So, yeah, if you guys have questions, shout them out.
All this talk with celestial invaders, were you the person that came on stage?
They wouldn't let me back on stage until now. No, that is a true story, though.
I gotta ask, what game was it for your face?
Oh, it was infamous Second Son. Clearly, I'm running around in the city somewhere.
So I'm just thinking about, what role then does evangelism have in the workplace?
What role does evangelism have in the workplace?
Yeah.
I think I was just trying to stress that, and I don't know if you guys are there, but definitely for me growing up, there was a sense of like, well, you need to be evangelizing all the time. I definitely had that when I was growing up in the church I was at. And so I definitely felt that sense when I went into the workplace of, well, if I'm not, talking to my coworkers about God, I'm failing in my work. And so I was kind of trying to get at that, and I hope you guys don't feel that, and I think you probably don't. Maybe it's unique to me, but I wanted to kind of address that. But I don't think that we should totally avoid it either. And I've swung over to the other side too, where I would avoid talking about it, where people would ask me what I was doing over the weekend, and I would just kind of gloss over the church. I wouldn't even talk about that. And so it took me a long time to get comfortable, just to share oh, well, I did this church thing or blah, blah. And so now my coworkers all know I'm Christian. They talk to me, and I have a Christian tattoo actually on my arm. You can't see, so that's sparked some conversations. I think it's kind of goes to a larger conversation on how evangelism works, and I think the best evangelism comes from a place of relationship. And so I think the workplace is actually kind of well suited to that because you develop relationships with your coworkers better than you develop relationships with most people in your life. At least ideally, right? You spend more time with them than you do other people. I just hope that you approach it from a place of relationship, and I think it needs to have a relationship with it. Otherwise it's just kind of pressing an agenda, right? So that's how I do it. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that.
Well, I think the relationship thing is critical. The other, and I grew up in my early Christian life as doing evangelism. And the evangelism that I learned, we also learned a phrase called, you need to earn the right to be heard.
Yeah.
So it's all contextual. So another wise man told me once, I was explaining a company that I was working with, and there was a Christian guy in the company, and we kind of connected. I said, this is going to be a great deal because there's this Christian guy working in the company. And this guy said, yeah, that's great. So now you can talk about Christ all the time. And I said, huh. He said, yeah, when I go to the hardware store, I look for the clerk that's going to take me into the aisle and pray with me.
That's what you said?
I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
This very wise man said that. So just put it in context. It's like, no.
Yeah.
No.
That's good.
So I like your relationship thing. I'd have to earn the right to be heard, and then also there's a context. If you're supposed to be doing a job and it's not the right time.
Right.
It's not the right time.
It's true too, because and that's kind of what I was getting at too. If you're dead set and focused on, I need to tell this person about Jesus, and I need to communicate it, and it's affecting your work, and you're doing a bad job at work, you're actually a bad example of Christian ethics in that case, I think. So there's time and place, but if it's not happening, if those conversations aren't happening, or people aren't asking you what's wrong with you, what are you doing on the weekend? Maybe you're not being open enough about who you are either.
So
came from a campus ministry where you're doing evangelism in the dorms, or you're going out just meeting people in Kaufman or whatever at the U and just making relationships, share the gospel. And then I go to a workplace and I just feel like it's completely different, right? And so I feel like in a campus ministry, it was all about, you know, we got 15 weeks in this semester, and after that, like, no idea where this kid's gonna be. So I gotta like make inroads. I gotta start hanging out with them twice, 3 times a week just so I can like build that relationship really quickly. And then I go to a workplace, that's just not the same thing. And so I feel like there's just a, I don't know, evangelism in the workplace looks very different. And I think, I don't know if everyone in campus ministry world got the best introduction, or if they just tried to take that campus ministry concept and move it into the workplace and say, it's got to move at this pace, it's got to move at this speed, and if I'm not making progress, if this guy doesn't become a believer, if I'm not making 3 or 4 believers a year, then like, I'm not doing my job as a Christian. And so it may be that evangelism has a really good place, but it may be that you drip this on someone for 2 years, 10 years, however long that relationship's going to last. I mean, imagine that I'm going to have really good, if I stick with my job, I might have a good friend that I've known for 30 years who knows I'm a Christian now, but maybe I'm waiting for that day when all of that dripping and all of that relationship really builds up and overflows at that point. It's not necessarily about 30 minutes, but it could be about 30 years in some cases. Yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts too? Thoughts or comments or questions?
It can also be used the wrong way. Late 70s, I worked as a waiter in Chicago. And there was a campus ministry that was taking the hotel up, and they left tracts as tips.
Yeah.
It's absolutely just was the worst example for some of these waiters.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
you know, a spiritual law, you know, the 4 spiritual law booklets, you know, like that. And it's like, what? As I approached the leader, he looked at me like completely befuddled. You know, but this is for their eternal life. Why would, you know, they'll understand someday. You know, they want food on their plates now.
Right.
But that's how wrong sometimes we think we're helping, but actually it's the wrong approach.
I just want to say I'm proud of you, man, as one member of your group, and just thanks for fueling into us today.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for listening. I was in theater in college. We always would like go to bow, you know, at the end. And then we'd always like, when the audience was clapping, we'd clap and like, oh, that's all because it's all the guy. I always thought it was like super nerdy. I mean, I get the sense, but it's